Chapter 1. Why me? I glanced over at the woman in the sexy red dress again. I had a perfect view from my corner of the bar. She was maybe 25 at most, had a beautiful tear-shaped ass, long slender legs then ended in delicate ankles perched in really high heels, and her long blonde hair reached almost down to her ass. Okay, she didn't have that big of breasts, B-cups maybe, but they were perky. Oh, so perky. It was a real delight to look at her, but I stopped at that well knowing I wasn't her type. Besides, I was much too old for her too. But I'm forgetting myself. I'm Chuck Brandigan, 49 years old, single by divorce. My wife had found me too boring. I'm an accountant at the local car manufacturer. It is a good job, decent pay. But every now and then I have to do some travels. Like my boss usually put it, you're single so it won't be any trouble for you. Well, he was wrong. More than anything, I really hate to travel. I always ended up eating too much fatty food and drinking too many beers. The battle of my weight was more or less a lost cause. I looked like what you'd expect a chef to look like. I had no waist, if you get my point. My Amoretti suit couldn't conceal that fact, despite its brave attempt, and I knew that too. I took a look at my Rolex. It was a gift from my company for 25 loyal years. I wouldn't buy something that expensive, but it gave a good impression when I represented my company. 11:12 p.m., the clock said. It was time to get some well-needed sleep. I had a boring meeting tomorrow and it wouldn't look good if I fell asleep during it. I emptied my scotch and looked one last time towards where the blonde girl had sat, but she had left. Well, I knew I'd dream sweet dreams about her tonight anyway. I pushed my way through the drunken crowd and pushed the up button on the elevator. The doors hissed open and I stepped in on the thick soft carpet in the elevator and pressed button 9. As the door was just about to close, the blonde woman rushed in and hurriedly pressed button 7. I stepped back further into the elevator so I could admire her wide hips from behind. I did so all the way up to the 7th floor. Nice view. The doors hissed open and the girl took a step out, then she suddenly spun around and fired off a wide smile towards me. Wow, I thought, surprised. Excuse me, sir, but my door has a very stiff, troublesome lock and I was wondering if would you be so kind and help me with it? She looked beggingly at me. Naturally, miss, I replied and smiled back. I couldn't refuse her that, not when she asked like that. It's just around the corner, she said, but I would have followed her a lot longer than that. She walked in front of me leading the way, which was perfect to me, because that way could I continue to admire her rocking ass. Can you believe people who can stand and admire a piece of rock or some other type of art just for its shapes? Well, I had never understood that, not when the beauty of a woman's body is so, well, divine. Room 704, she said. I nodded, almost dribbling. She picked up the key from her handbag and handed me. I was a bit surprised by the speed she had found it. Usually women has so much stuff in their bags that they can't find anything. I put it in the lock and when I turned it, it moved really smooth. I looked up surprised. Was she hitting on me? A fat geek? The next moment flashed everything in front of my eyes as a devastating electrical shock passed through my body. It jerked for a moment before I passed out from the pain it had caused. As I slowly came back to consciousness, my whole body ached and I had something big in my mouth nearly the size of a tennis ball, but it had to have a hole in it since I could breathe through it. Idiot, I thought, how could I have been so stupid? Oh! Is the big boss awake? Did you really think you'd have sex with me? Me? She screamed out before breaking into a long spell of laughter. Well, you disgusting creep, I'm sick of hearing suggestions from people like you. How dare you ogle me, you pig, she said hatefully before kicking my foot. I was too numb to feel any pain from the kick. This crazy woman was really starting to worry me. And what was worse, I couldn't move. A quick glance told me that my arms and legs were stretched out so that I formed a nude X on the gigantic bed, and whatever I had in my mouth only allowed minor sounds from me. I looked up, facing her again. She was digging through her bags. After a while picked she up a necklace and a black dress, then she got the most disturbing look on her face as she moved closer to me. I tried to see what the necklace was while she was holding it, but could only see the glint of silver as she wrapped it in the dress. The silvery necklace stunned me as she touched me with it while holding it through the dress. A feeling so creepy it made my neck hair stand up, moved through my whole body. As it started to fade away, started the evil woman to laugh again as she looked quite intense on me. I saw no point in facing the crazy woman's gaze, so I put my head back. I just had to wait her out and hope she wouldn't hurt me. The pain from the stun gun was slowly fading away, and I noticed I could move my fingers and toes a little easier. The sudden silence surprised me. I turned my head and looked up a bit. I saw that she was twisting her mouth in displeased measuring way. Then she picked up a bra and I felt another sting, soon followed by laughter again. Now it felt like something was moving on my chest, but I ignore it as a figment of my imagination. She was once again rummaging around in her bags, then she held up a wide ribbon-looking thing. What was it called? I couldn't remember, but my wife had used one to hold her stomach in. I got another sting and I somehow got an uncomfortable tight contracting feeling in my waist area. Luckily it soon disappeared again, but I had no time figure out why since I got another sting again. This time it was my hips that started to feel weird, almost like they were expanding a bit. The whole thing puzzled me considerably. Perfect, the woman muttered and nodded, an evil smile formed on her lips, then she suddenly shook her head. No. Something is definitively missing. The legs, yes, that's it, but how? She mumbled, putting a finger towards her lip. Her face shone and displayed an incredible beauty. She dove down on her bags again, and after a short hunt she held up a pair of new jeans. She compared them against my legs. I think she actually measured my legs against the pants. I looked, wondering, but she ruthlessly pushed my head back down again before giving my face a slap. Don't do that again, you'll see the result soon enough, she chuckled. I felt that darn sting again and felt that creepy feeling passing from my waist and moving down all the way to my feet. She watched me intensively, an expression of discontent grow rapidly on her face. Shit. Now I'll have to start all over, she blurted out angrily. As I looked up, wondering what the heck she was talking about, she ruthlessly slapped my face again. You can look later, damn it. I'll paralyze you with my stun gun again if you don't obey, she threatened. I got several small stings over the next few minutes as she picked the earlier stuff again, and several weird creeping movements passed all over my body now, but it was strongest from my waist and down. It all ended with her most pleased laughter. It continued a long time. Once she gained control over herself, she picked up a dark blue lipstick. I got another sting. It was starting to really annoy me now. Her laughter followed closely. She was in a really good mood now, almost singing while she was moved through the whole list of makeup stuff, wigs and so on, stinging me repeatedly. I was starting to wonder if it never was to end when she held up a pair of red 6-inch heels. Once again I felt the darn sting, then it stopped. Finally, you look so right now, her remark made her giggle for a long time. Now I'll just put you up for the finder's scene. Believe me, this is a great one. You'll love the irony in it. She started to guffaw. She had tears in her eyes when she finally stopped. I'll just give you a little trip. It's medical stuff, so don't worry. Oh. Yes, when you comes around again, I'd recommend you claim amnesia. It will save you a lot of trouble, she said, bursting out in laughter again. I saw her load a syringe and tapped on it to get rid of the bubbles. I tried to scream and pulled my straps, desperate to get loose, but they didn't give in. She buried the needle deep in my upper arm, then it was too late. After a few moments, the walls started to spin and I had trouble focusing. Suddenly there was a sharp pain in my groin, but by then I was too high to really understand what just had happened. Whatever it was pulled out just as fast as it had been pushed in, and I had soon forgot all about it. I was moving in and out in a woozy dream state and had no clue to my surroundings. Chapter 2. Unconscious. Police, the blonde girl mumbled into the phone. Please hold, you're number 14 in the queue, the recorded voice reported. Damn! The blonde woman exploded. Your number is 13 in the queue, the recorded voice repeated many minutes later. You number is... The voice had started bouncing inside the blonde woman's head. Please press 1 for emergencies, press 2 for... You pressed 1, you're number 3 in the queue, the recorded voice said. The blonde woman's scream scared the cleaning woman to such a level she dropped her towels. Sorry, she apologized to the cleaning woman. Police department, a male voice answered. Yes, I'd want to report a child rape in progress, the blonde woman said. Rape, I'll connect you. You're number 5 in the queue. The blonde woman looked stupidly at the phone. This had been a bad idea, she realized. Rape department, how can we help you, said a female voice. I want to report a rape in progress, Hilton Hotel, room 704, come quickly, the blonde woman said. Miss, that's the emergencies table. You need to report to an ongoing crime. The voice was interrupted by the blonde woman hitting the phone on the nearby wall so hard that plastic parts flew out from it. After taking something like 10 deep breaths, the woman had finally gained enough self-control to think again. She walked over to the second and last working phone, hitting 911. Emergencies. A voice said ambulance, the blonde woman replied. St. Lawrence Hospital, a new voice said. Ambulance, repeated the blonde woman. Ambulance, a male voice said. Raped child, Hilton Hotel, room 704, needs immediate medical care, the blonde woman hurried to say and hung up. Then she took the elevator down to the lobby where she sat down and waited. 3 minutes and 5 seconds later, in rushed 3 paramedics, 2 carrying a stretcher and 1 carrying a box. Then 5 minutes later the cops show up, followed by a red-faced detective. The blonde woman stood up and walked out from the building. She smiled as she thought of one proper punishment among many for her constantly cheating boyfriend. Wasn't her neighbor's dog in heat? The detective was most annoyed as he took the elevator up. Why did people always call the hospital first? He hated to be called out by the ambulance crew every time there was a crime. He entered room 704 and was met by the view of a beautiful dark-haired young girl completely naked and tied by 4 ties as to form an X. She was bleeding in her groin. The detective wrote down a clear case of rape, girl 14 or 15 years of age. He walked up next to the heavily painted girl and bent down to her face. What's your name? He asked. Chuck Brandygon, the girl mumbled rather absently after a while. What's wrong with her? He asked as he wrote the name down. She's obviously been drugged by an unknown substance. We need to take her now or she might die, the ambulance man said. Well, don't stand there then, take her, he said and pointed out with his thumb, fearing the extra amount of paperwork a murder scenario would give. The girl was loaded onto the stretcher and the 3 men left in a hurry. As the detective looked around the room, he discovered the syringe laying on the floor. He pointed at it and a policeman rapidly put it in a plastic bag that he sealed and labeled. The detective noticed the room was clean, too clean except for the small pool of blood on the sheet. He turned around and stepped on something. It lay just under the edge of the bed. He bent down and lifted the object up. It was a wallet, belonging to a Chuck Brandigan. Bingo, the detective thought. Put out a warrant on Chuck Brandigan, he said. Dead or alive? Joked the younger cop. Dead, preferable, the detective replied rough while thinking of the poor young girl. He had a daughter in her age. Chapter 3. Waking up. It was the regular weak beeping sound that woke me up. I saw a white roof and white walls. I slowly concluded I had to be in a hospital. I had survived. My mouth and throat felt extremely dry and I had this annoying itch on my chin. As I scratched myself, was I surprised to notice I had no beard stubble. In fact, my skin had never felt that smooth before. I assume it simply had to be a fake feeling produced by the drug she had given me. I was still feeling drowsy, so I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. However, I couldn't lay comfortably, so I put my arms on my stomach instead. That made me realize something was seriously wrong. My arms should have rested on a large soft belly, but they had found a flat muscular waist instead. I moved my hands rapidly up and down and made two new discoveries. I had tits and worse, my penis was gone. I was a. My quick conclusion echoed 3 floors down. The next thing I became aware of was when 3 nurses came running and jumped straight on me and gave me a shot in my arm. I knew I should do something as the nurses left me, but I just couldn't make myself care any longer. I just lay there ignoring everything. Forming the simplest thought was a huge task for me. After a long time drifted I into a troubled sleep. When I finally awoke again, was there much more sounds outside my room. It had to be daytime. Suddenly a woman dressed in a white coat appeared in front of my bed. I couldn't follow her rapid movement, but her examination was the fastest I'd ever seen. "What is your name?" she asked very fast. I had to think for a while to remember. "Chuck," I whispered, but the woman had already walked away. Later on, I awoke once again, disturbed by the sound of 2 voices talking close to me. I listened in, feeling rather bored. "She shouldn't have had that much. Who authorized it?" a male voice demanded. "The night shift," she was hysterical, a female voice replied. "Give her only 2 milliliters from now on, that's plenty for such a young girl," the male voice said quite harsh. I slowly opened my eyes, seeing a woman standing over me. She reminded me of the woman who asked for my name recently. She moved her hand along my chin. However, I was more confused about the fact there was no trace of any other people inside the room. It was almost like people moved around in the speed of light. "Do you remember your name?" she whispered very gently. "Chuck," I whispered. She got a disappointed look on her face. No, forget that name." "What's your own name?" she tried again. I thought for a while. "Chuck," I replied again. She breathed out noisily and walked away, leaving me alone. An unknown time passed until I noticed it had become easier to form thoughts and think. My hands once again flew around, confirming the fact I had no penis. The evil blonde woman had turned me into a woman. That much I understood after some not too heavy thinking. The insight didn't shock me as much this time, since I simply couldn't make myself to care that much about anything at all. Just studying the white ceiling simplicity was a task that I found more in my level. After a couple of days had passed by in a swoop, I didn't bother to mention my name any longer. They simply didn't want to hear it, and they absolutely didn't want to accept that I was 49 years old either, and well, frankly, I didn't bother that much about convincing them either. I just didn't have the energy to argue about anything, and every time I tried to open my mouth to protest, they just shoveled some more pills into it. Eventually, they took me off the heavier drugs and I was sent to a male shrink. I felt strong enough to put my facts on the table. I clearly stated that I actually was Chuck Brandigon. The shrink nodded patient, and then I experienced a new treatment, the electroshock therapy. It took me just a few treatments to make me quite determined not to mention anything about anybody named Chuck to that evil shrink ever again. What bothered me even more than my gender transformation was the fact that I had constant dark blue nails, on my toes too, dark blue lips and dark eyeshadow. It just couldn't be removed. Well, if you were to imagine the makeup of a very sexy vampire, then you come close to how I looked. It was as if the makeup was tattooed into my skin. The long eyelashes weren't as much trouble, however. I'd just cut them as short as I could, almost like a shaving actually. They didn't let me near any scissors after that. They even took my nail cutter, and worst of all, they all stubbornly kept calling me Jane Doe. I hated that name. Chapter 3. New Shrink. Dr. Van Dyke, why do you want me to take over this Jane Doe case? Doc Smith asked. Well, and I've completely lost the girl's trust. She'll say anything I want to hear if I push her, but she won't tell the truth as she sees it. She claims amnesia, but she simply knows far too much about everything else for that. Dr. Al Van Dyke had a sound of defeat in his voice. So what do we know about her? And sighed. Not that much. We do know who raped her, and so does she, but she simply refuses to talk about it, just keeps on stubbornly mentioning a blonde woman. She hates her body, her sex, her look, and identifies herself as a male transformed into a girl. She's highly intelligent but hates TV. She much rather preferred to restlessly wander around the hallways instead, Al said. That sounds like the typical case of your specialty. Yes, it does, but she's not responding to any of the normal treatments. Al Van Dyke shook his head. Interesting. Okay, I'll take her. I like a real challenge, and smiled. Only a week later, Dr. Van Dyke found himself pulled next to a small room rather forcefully by Anne. He looked in and saw the Jane Doe girl glued in front of the TV set. How did you manage that? Al blurted out, surprised. Discovery Channel. She likes the Sport Channel too, just not as much. Don't get between her and the TV or you might get hurt, and laughed. Impressive, she looks so much healthier now, almost happy, Al concluded. I've completely taken her off the medication. She's starting to trust me now, but she don't know who she is or how old she is. Christ, she can't even paint her nails if she wanted to, but she knows how to calculate the speed of an accelerating rocket and things like that. That's something anybody in her age shouldn't have known. I'm telling you, she must have been brilliant in school anyway. She's completely blocking her whole feminine side, and it just won't be unlocked. It's almost like she never had a female side at all, and cited. Well, if you think she'll recover better with the electroshock therapy, then can I always jump in and take her hate for it, just so you don't lose the trust. You only need to ask, Al promised. Thanks, but she's too clever to fall for that, and I doubt it'll work any better this time, and said thoughtfully. Well, then I wish you good luck, Al said and walked off. Chapter 4. I don't know. I don't know who I am. You know that it's not my fault. I thought I was Chuck Brandigon, I told, and for the 1,000th time, it was a lie that felt more true every time I repeated it. But you do know you're not a male or ever been one. Right? And pushed. I'm well aware I'm a girl, I sighed. I was really tired of having to admit that, and I utterly hoped I wouldn't have say I'm a female, and I'm happy about it 25 times again like I used to have to do if I showed any doubt about what I was. So how do you like your new skirt and blouse? And asked. Not one bit. I told you I'd preferred pants, you know that, I replied. Wearing a skirt made me most embarrassed. I felt like I was cross-dressing. Even the embarrassing hospital gown would have been less embarrassing. Thank God she hadn't insisted for the sundress. Why? Are they ugly or just wrong color? And wondered. No, I just don't like skirts. They make me feel naked, I explained. But you hated the sundress and that's not a skirt, and replied, making me almost moan of annoyance. That's even worse, I felt completely naked, damn it, and that scares hell of me, I said, and congratulated myself for my quick reply. This woman analyzed everything I said, and I usually ended up eating up my own words one way or another. Well, why didn't you put on the pantyhose then? And throw in and almost made me tilt the chair off balance. Well, I don't want people to see me as a sexual object, I replied and shrugged. That should make her satisfied. Besides, that was true too. I hated the thought of being ogled by guys. Okay, I think that's enough for today. Let's take that trip to the museum now, Jane, and smiled. Finally, I thought, she delayed the trip for more than an hour so far, and frankly, I suspected it was just because I had refused to wear that fancy pink bra. I was overjoyed to be able to get out from the ward, even if it only was for a couple of hours. They'd kept me locked in for 5 weeks now, and I was almost ready to climb the walls. I mean, I'd even agreed to wear that darn skirt just to get out. The museum wasn't quite what I'd expected. It was an art museum, but that wasn't the biggest surprise. They had a major exhibition about femininity. I felt deceived, to say the least. I had put on a humiliating skirt and walked out public for that. I could almost feel the guide's eyes staring on my neck as we walked out from the museum. The guy had used all opportunities to stare at me during the whole tour. He had even somehow managed to stand next to me whether I was back or in front of the group. The guide really liked you, and smiled. Disgusting creep, that one. He should be castrated. I commented and made a disgusted face. No, I think he was quite cute. Anyway, you clearly put up too many flags to show him you weren't one bit interested, and said, most amused. I know the type, he's one of those who thinks he's God's gift to womanhood, I replied. I'd always hated that type of guys. They just snapped their fingers and girls jumped all over them. Most observant of you, Jane, I think you. Well, never mind that. Let's go to McDonald's, shall we? And said. I nodded eagerly. The hospital food might be nutritious, but it wasn't one bit tasty. The enjoyment of my simple cheeseburger simply couldn't be described. It had never tasted that good before, and the best thing about it was that I forgot about all the ogling guys for a while. If I'd been a cat, I'd been purring loudly of contentment. It simply made me feel great. Chapter 5. Is that wise? Are you serious about this? Al asked as he stormed into Anne's office. What? And replied, surprised by the sudden intrusion. You're picking adoptive parents for Jane Doe. Al seemed quite upset. Yes, it's time to let her live a normal life, and said. This isn't proper procedure, and besides, it's the government's decision, Al claimed. Now look here, Al. I know her needs. I'm not going to let some insensible bureaucrat put her into some crowded family that she'll never fit into, and protested angry. But that's not our problem, Al explained more calmly. It should be. The orphanage she would have been sent to has already agreed to cooperate fully. Besides, they really don't want girls her age, they're too hard to get adopted, and explained. Well, yes, but is that wise? I mean, well, they do have a lot of experience in these matters, Al added. I'm using that knowledge to its full extent. Frankly, I've got 2 suitable families as we speak. The Sampson family lives quite close to my house, so I'd be able to easily check Jane up, and said proudly. Yes, that's practical. She'll be needing a more long-term therapy, but what else would make the Sampsons the better choice? Aren't you getting too involved? That's our job, Al, to get involved. Anyway, why the Sampson family? Well, they've taken in a lot of older children on a short term during the last 10 years, and they got 2 daughters of their own, 16 and 18 years old. Also, they have a large farm, and I think a calm country life would be just right for Jane, and nodded. A farm? Now, why would such a harsh environment be suitable? Al asked, surprised. Jane doesn't like large crowds, especially if it includes boys ogling her. This way she'll be going to a small school the first year, learning about her classmates on a much closer level, and have a relaxing privacy at home. It's perfect, and smiled. Well, and perhaps you're right. I do hope so anyway. You've proven me wrong so many times before, so. Well, do as you please then. I wash my hands in this. Al shook his head as he walked away, mumbling something about complete madness. There was just a weak scent of cow manure in Anne's office as she interviewed Mr. and Mrs. Sampson and their daughters. The whole family was dressed in a simple but comfortable way that still looked rather good. Mr. Sampson was a rather round but shoulder-wide man in his last 40s. He had a most entertaining sense of humor that he wasn't one bit afraid to use. Mrs. Sampson, however, held slightly lower profile personal compared to her husband. She was a slim woman in her early 40s. She replied to Anne's questions in a way one wouldn't have expected from a simple farm wife. She was a lot smarter than she looked, and their daughters seemed to have inherited that part from their mother. They, too, were quite sharp. You've asked for a child long-term this time, why this change? And asked Mr. and Mrs. Sampson looked at each other. Mr. Sampson nodded. We don't want another teen with a criminal background on a short term. It takes time to guide them the right way and keep them there, Mrs. Sampson explained. The other 3 nodded in agreement. Well, this time it's not about a criminal teen at all, but a girl who don't know who she is, and neither do we. Am I afraid? And started. She noticed the fast eye exchange between Mr. and Mrs. Sampson. They were already interested. You mean we actually might keep her? Oh, sorry, go on please, Mr. Sampson said. He smiled widely to cover his thoughtless interruption. Well, there are a few things you'll definitely need to know about her, but why don't we go down and visit her first before you make up minds about this, and suggested. She was met by 4 agreeing nods. Chapter 5. Visitors. I was watching Discovery Channel as usual. It was about larger dinosaurs. The program tried to solve the puzzle of whether the meat-eaters worked in packs or as single hunters. I was interrupted by a rapid knock on the door then, and walked in closely followed by 4 strangers. I immediately felt embarrassed wearing the darn skirt, and killed the TV quickly. I had learned that behavior well enough to know there was no point in protesting. I waited for her to start while I took a good look at the 4 strangers. Jane, this is the Sampson family, Rupert, Beatrice, Amy and Amaneda, and introduced. I shook hand with them while silently wondering what Anne was up to now. Amy and Amaneda, Latin origin, loved and lovable it means, right? I asked, recalling a weak memory from a boring Latin class. And shrugged, but Mr. and Mrs. Sampson beamed considerably. It had just flown out of me. It was something that had worked itself into my backbone and was actually a way for me to break the ice when I visit a new company and meet new people. So tell me, Jane, have you ever lived outside a city? Rupert asked, still smiling. I stopped, sighed soundly and shrugged. I had almost made a fool of myself. Now that was a well-laid trap. I cursed myself silently while I still managed to keep my smile up. Chuck Brandigon had to stay dead for me. all thanks to the blonde woman's action scenario. I was wanted all over the country as a child molester, and I had been the child. I doubted I'd even find her again. After all, if she could change me this much, then she would have no trouble changing herself into anybody she wanted. I had to fight off the despair again. We all sat down. They asked about me, but what could I tell them? It wasn't much. Anyway, they were farmers and they were very nice. They told me a lot about their farm, their neighbors, and the small town in the area. I guess it was a way for them to keep me in the conversation. I couldn't help but to really like them. Like Rupert, he had a way to put in a story or a joke now and then. The others weren't far behind, as they'd twist a joke even further and toss it back at Rupert. I actually laughed more in that short time than I had for several years. What a gang that family was. Even Anne had to fight to keep her smile in control. And never told me what it was all about as they left, but I suspected it was a way to train me to talk to strangers. Well, they didn't feel like strangers to me any longer. I felt like I'd known them all my life after that short talk. I really hoped they'd drop by again. It had been most refreshing. I could still hear Rupert's voice far away down the hallway as they walked away. "I love her," he said. "Where's those papers?" Beatrice repeated, impatient. "How soon?" one of the girls asked eagerly. I couldn't hear Anne's reply, since the door slammed shut. Well, there was no point trying to eavesdropping anyway. They keep all the hallway doors locked. I got back to my TV. I was the most privileged patient on the whole ward, with having my own TV in my room and having all the channels I had. All thanks to Anne. It really helped me endure this prison environment. I only wished she would get me a pair of pants. But it stood on the top of my wish list. Chapter 6. What? But 2 weeks later, I was awakened early by a nurse. I got enough time to get dressed, then was I escorted to Anne's office, where there was a strange man there. He looked just like a typical bureaucrat. "Jane Doe?" he asked with an authorizing voice. Yes, I nodded nervously, looking down on my small hands. I had a bad feeling about this. "I am hereby signing you over to the Sampson family. You are now Jane Sampson, age 14. We have given you a new birth year. You'll be 15 on New Year's Day," he said, and sounded like it was something he said too often. He started to put the papers into a portfolio. What? But? I was baffled. How could they do that? I was 49, for God's sake. "Jane, get yourself together. You must have realized we can't keep you here until you're of legal age. Besides, you liked the Sampsons a lot," and said. "Yes, but..." I tried twisting. I was really shocked. "Have a nice life, young lady," the man said monotonously, and walked away, completely ignoring me. "Don't worry, Jane, they really loved you. If it hadn't been for the bureaucratic paper mill, they'd taken you the same day." And said, smiling. I was sent back to my room with the order to pack my few belongings: 2 skirts, 5 shirts, the pantyhose, some underwear, and the darn sundress, and that was it. I put it all into a cloth sack the ward supplied me with, then I sat down waiting most nervously. An hour later an escort nurse came for me again. I was more or less pushed out through the hallway doors. Rupert and Beatrice Sampson stood there waiting for me together with Anne. They almost broke my ribs by their hugs, and both Anne and Beatrice kissed me on the cheek too. I blushed colorfully as I was dragged away by the Sampsons. My knees felt weak as we stepped up next to the truck. They placed me in the middle in their new pickup, and Beatrice had her arm around my shoulder all the way. She clearly understood how nervous I was, and with their assurances I'd like the farm didn't help me one bit. It felt like the drive took forever. As we drove up the dirt road, I could see their red barn for the first time. It was gigantic, and there were large numbers of cattle on the fields. There were also some horses on a smaller field, and lots of corn plants surrounded the whole place. The White House had 3 floors and a basement, but it was the small tower with windows in all directions that made the house unique. It was surrounded by a large garden filled with huge apple trees. We stopped in front of the porch where the girls rushed out and pulled me along. This may sound harsh on your first day here, Jane, but it can't be helped. Today you'll stay in the house, but you can use the porch, but that's it. Do you understand? Mrs. Sampson said. I shook my head since I really couldn't get the point. Well, it don't matter. Just promise me this, okay? She pushed on. Okay. I replied and shrugged. I had no way to go anyway. Good girl, she smiled. Come on, Jane, I'll show you your room, Amy said very eagerly. Amy pulled me along upstairs to a small but nice, though mostly girlish room. It had a faint smell of paint and glue. The bed was nicely placed under the tilted roof wall. I dropped my small sack on the bed, walked over to the window and looked out. I had a nice view out over the large fruit garden. As I turned around, there stood a brand new writing desk in a corner perfectly fitted next to the closet. It must have been a bitch to get it in there, I thought. Dad made it, for your homework, Amy said, my face wrinkled a bit at the thought of homework. Nice handwork, I admitted. You haven't seen the best yet, Amy smiled. Amy opened the closet and I looked in. Now I knew why the room was so small. My clothes would have to scream to each other inside there. There was lots of shoe shelves, hangers, smaller drawers, and it had space for everything one could imagine. Amy walked out again, giggling. Now, this is nice, she said as she walked over to the desk again. I looked up wondering. She showed me 2 secret wall doors. One was made to keep my books and place for pens as well as other stuff there, while the other had a large makeup mirror on the inside of the door and spaces for the more girly stuff. The whole thing was very clever though. I was actually impressed. Our mom's idea, Amy said. Your mom is quite clever then, I replied. Hey. Our mom, remember that little sister, Amy said. I guess I got another weird expression in my face because it made Amy laugh. Did I mention there were large drawers under the bed? Well, the big question was what to put in them. Anyway, Amy dragged me around the whole house from bottom to top. I really liked the tower. The view was great, but the large barn blocked it a bit. We girls had a toilet on our floor, shower included. There were 3 small guest rooms and another toilet on the second floor together with Mr. and Mrs. Sampson's bedroom. The first floor included kitchen, dining room and a guest living room, very fancy books and all. There wasn't a swimming pool in the basement as I'd hoped, but half of it contained the largest TV I'd ever seen as well as several video recorders, a 4-speaker movie system, several cozy easy chairs and a large sofa. The other half contained a laundry room and an office. Mrs. Sampson worked there during the days. It wasn't until Amy tried to make me try out an old dress she'd outgrown that I put my foot down and walked back to my new room. The first day of my new life was long but definitely not lonely. I hadn't had a minute alone. It was hard to fall asleep that night. But as I did so, I thought that perhaps this life wouldn't be so bad after all.